In no way, shape or form do I condone or support any of this actor's controversial views or remarks. This video has been made purely to be about the character he happens to have played and not about the actor himself or his views. To that effect, I have decided not to mention the actor by name and also to censor any appearance by them on the cover art used. It has also been produced to function as a basic rundown of this incarnation's adventures for those who do not wish to purchase the audios themselves. Any such comments related to him as an actor or his views in any way will be removed. There are plenty of other places where those subjects can be discussed, and so if you wish to do so, please do it there and not in my comments section. This channel is a place of inclusivity. Welcome to everybody, and hate has no place here.
What's that word you use?
Spoilers.
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 Spoilers. Spoilers. Spoilers.
I like that word.
I thought you might.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Brief History, and today we're going to be looking at another incarnation of the Master. This is the Big Finish incarnation known as the Inventor Master. But before we even begin with this incarnation, there is some debate over his exact placement. There have been many varying accounts of the Master's life before leaving Gallifrey, and indeed which incarnation was the one who actually left. However, for the purposes of this video, we will simply be dealing with the narrative given for this particular incarnation. It was implied in some press releases for the First Doctor Adventures Volume 1 that this Master was in fact intended to be the First Master. However, it was later stated by John Dorney that this incarnation was never actually intended to be the First Master, simply an earlier incarnation. Whilst many assumed Milo Parker's incarnation in Masterfall to seemingly be a younger version of the Inventor incarnation, more recently, the story Blood of the Time Lords implies that the Inventor incarnation may have more likely been a second or third incarnation of the Master. Either way, according to this iteration of the character's narrative, it was this incarnation, already using the name Master, who stole a TARDIS and fled Gallifrey. So now we get on to the character's adventures, and for this video, I'm actually going to start with the last released story, Blood of the Time Lords. However, in researching this story, I got in touch with Timothy X. Atack, who wrote it. He revealed that when he initially wrote this story, the exact incarnation of the Master that was going to feature wasn't fixed, only that it would be an early-ish one. As such, he said the placement of this story is very much open to interpretation. I also got in touch with Big Finish writer and script editor John Dorney. His personal view is that Blood of the Time Lords is in fact a later story for this incarnation. However, due to the ambiguity of this particular incarnation's numbering, its exact placement is again open to interpretation. And as such, if details can be pieced together to give it a more fitting placement, then that is just as valid. So for the purposes of this video, given that this story takes place in and around Gallifrey, it makes more narrative sense to me that this is in fact his first adventure before leaving Gallifrey for the first time. Blood of the Time Lords sees the Inventor Master, now possibly in his second or third incarnation, deciding to construct a device known as a parenthesis clock. This device gave its user the ability to rewrite history, time and reality, whilst allowing its users' timelines to remain intact. During his years at the Academy with the Doctor, they used a half-dismantled TARDIS and a link to the Matrix to erase their true names from history, thus going on to give him the idea of creating the parenthesis clock. Through a combination of disguises and hypnosis, the Master convinced several other Time Lords, including one of his former teachers, to construct the clock in the Recusery, a library on one of the moons of Gallifrey where dying Time Lords go to reflect on their lives. However, its proximity also gave him access to the Matrix. The connection to the Matrix, along with a temporal extractor, allowed him to use the life forces of Time Lords to power the clock. His intentions being to erase the Time Lords from history, whilst using the clock to preserve his own existence and become a god. His plans were thwarted, however, when the Fourth Doctor, having found a mysterious book in his TARDIS, also arrived at the Recusery. The book in question being the Discord Grimoire, a tome which seemingly has the ability to alter the passage of time. However, in typical fashion, of course, the Doctor arrived just as things started to kick off. Despite the Master's attempts to have the Doctor framed for the many murders he had committed, and crush the Doctor and his temporary companion Eleonora to death in his discarded TARDIS, the Doctor manages to foil the Master at every turn, eventually uncovering his involvement but only after he has finished building and activated the parenthesis clock. However, due to miscalculations by the Master and errors in its build, the clock begins to malfunction. Now trapped inside the clock's time bubble, the Master begs the Doctor for help, with the Doctor having discovered that the Discord Grimoire is in fact a kind of instruction manual for the parenthesis clock. Whilst the Doctor is able to use the clock in order to revive everyone who was killed in the Master's pursuit of it, the Master seemingly falls to his death as the clock collapses around him. Now it's at this point I'm going to slip slightly into fan theories territory, because I'd like to explain exactly how and why I think this story leads into the next one. The Master seemingly falling to his death only to survive is, let's be honest at this point, hardly a challenge for the character to survive. So in my mind, he uses a hidden matrix door to escape, head back to Gallifrey, finding himself in a TARDIS workshop, where he steals a TARDIS and escapes. This then leads into the story The Destination Wars, which reveals that it was seemingly this incarnation of the Master who was the first incarnation to steal a TARDIS and leave Gallifrey. However, the particular Type 45 TARDIS he stole was broken, having not been overhauled by the Quadriggers, aka TARDIS engineers on Gallifrey. As such, it was in even more poor shape than the Doctor's, and almost immediately began to fall apart around him, eventually leading him to be stranded on Destination, a semi-primitive planet on a far arm of a distant galaxy in one of the earliest segments of time. Using what little still functioning remains there were of his stolen TARDIS, he built himself a laboratory and set himself up as the Inventor, seemingly helping a group of human colonists achieve technological advancements to defeat the native Dalmari. The Master also secretly supplied the Dalmari with technological advancements in order to achieve his ultimate aim, that of a technological arms race, in order to capitalize on the eventual creation of nuclear fission, which he could use to repair his broken TARDIS. When the First Doctor arrived on Destination along with Ian, Barbara and Susan, the Master stole the Doctor's TARDIS, also taking Ian and Barbara as hostages, leaving the Doctor to broker a peace between the human colonists and Dalmari, who were now at war with each other. However, Ian and Barbara were able to overpower the Master and use the TARDIS's fast return switch to return it to the Doctor. In turn, the Doctor managed to trap the Master in the remains of his laboratory/broken TARDIS, which was now almost completely powerless and left him at the mercy of the now two united factions. This incarnation next appeared in the story The Psychic Circus, itself a prequel and sequel to the story The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Implied to take place while still stranded on Destination, the Master was able to ally himself with the gods of Ragnarok on the planet Siganax. The gods gave the Master a pendant which allowed him to psychically contact a street performer on the planet Zamyatin. Through the pendant, the Master convinces the street performer, also known as Kingpin, to become the de facto, although albeit reluctant, leader of an eventually successful resistance movement against the oppressive anti-entertainment government of Zamyatin. The Master goes on to persuade Kingpin to gather together a collective of performing artists in order to become a travelling band of performers. They do so, find a bus, and go on to become a travelling circus. However, possibly due to the Master's intervention, the bus arrives and breaks down on Siganax. Whilst believing themselves only temporarily stranded, they hold talent shows looking for new performers in their circus, one of whom was a young caretaker from Paradise Towers, who performed as a clown and eventually won the talent show. However, sensing the young man's ambition for success and Kingpin's ever-growing reluctance, the Master psychically contacts the young man who performed as a clown and makes him the new leader of the circus, becoming its chief clown. Under the Master's influence, he reprograms the bus's robot conductor to kill anyone who tries to leave, and proposes that they hold more talent contests in order to bring in more performers to their show, whereas in reality it was so that the Master would have more psychic energy to feed off. Now realising how dangerous things are becoming, Kingpin seeks help, managing to make contact with the Seventh Doctor. However, the Master tries to use his now not inconsiderable psychic powers to stop the Doctor from arriving on Siganax, projecting various mental illusions in order to disorientate him. Eventually, however, the Doctor confronts the Master on a psychic plane. Using his talents for manipulation and misdirection, the Doctor uses the God's own curiosity to buy time and eventually steals the pendant from the Master and passes it on to Kingpin. Kingpin destroys the pendant, breaking the Master's hold over the psychic Circus, and despite begging for help, the Doctor leaves the Master at the God's mercy, trapped on the psychic plane. Eventually, however, by unknown means, the Master was able to escape the God's influence, repair his TARDIS, and escape destination. He next encountered the second Doctor in the story The Home Guard, which saw him on a planet where human colonists had settled into a fictional recreation of an English village during the Second World War. Using his hypnotic abilities, the Master took control of the planet and formed a Home Guard, arming the population of the planet in order to provoke a conflict for his own experiments. After some time, the second Doctor arrived with Ben, Polly and Jamie, and the Master used his hypnotic abilities to convince them all they were in fact part of the illusion. Eventually, the Doctor, having become completely immersed in his fictional role as a Home Guard commander, managed to actually make contact with the native species of the planet, his intention being to reach a peaceful solution. However, it resulted in the native species attacking far earlier than the Master intended them to. In the ensuing battle, the Master used his TARDIS to skip ahead in time, planning to see the outcome, but on his arrival, fell into a trap of the Doctor's, now back in his own mind, to capture him. Following these events, the Master was put on trial by galactic authorities for illegal use of mind control, and his TARDIS was confiscated. And that, at present time, and likely for the foreseeable future, is the end of the Inventor Master's timeline. And on that note, it brings to a close another A Brief History. A big thanks to Timothy X. Atack and John Dorney for their help in researching these stories and their continuity. It's always great to have the input of the people who actually worked on these sorts of things. But it just leaves me to say, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Like, favorite, subscribe, share, it really helps me out a lot, and be sure to check out the description below for a link to my Patreon. I've had a bit of a reshuffle, so there is only the one tier on there at the moment for which you can get your name at the end of my videos, but it is the smallest donation tier, and all of your donations are greatly received. So, no matter who you are, how you identify, or however you choose to live your life, this is a place you are very welcome, and I definitely salute you all, and I will see you with another video very soon.